I was standing in a glass conference room while my brother took credit for the product I'd spent 2 years building down to the smallest feature he once asked me to explain again. Why was he the one presenting it? Why did no one question where it came from? And why was there a sealed letter from the U.S. Patent Office sitting in front of me with my name on it? Ethan smiled like everything belonged to him. "This is something I built from the ground up," he said. My hands didn't shake, but my chest tightened. Because if that letter said what I thought it did, then this wasn't just betrayal. It was evidence. Before I opened it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I didn't realize how important timing was until everything started to come down to one exact date. 2 years earlier, I wasn't thinking about patents or legal timelines. I was thinking about a problem no one around me seemed to take seriously. Small businesses, especially independent retailers, were losing money every day because they couldn't predict inventory flow. They either overstocked and tied up cash or ran out and missed sales. I saw it constantly through my work as a product designer consulting for local shops across San Diego. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, repetitive loss, and it bothered me more than it should have. So I started building something on my own. At first, it was just sketches in a notebook. A system that could learn from sales patterns, adjust reorder timing, and adapt to seasonal changes without requiring a full-time analyst. I wasn't trying to build a startup. I was trying to solve something real. Night after night, I worked at my small kitchen table, turning ideas into wireframes, then into early prototypes. I tracked every version, carefully naming files by date, keeping notes on what worked and what didn't. It became a habit, not because I thought I'd need proof someday, but because that's how I worked. Organized, methodical, Ethan noticed. My brother had always been the opposite of me, outgoing, confident, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make people believe in him within 5 minutes. Growing up, that was seen as strength. What I did thinking building quietly was seen as optional. "Still working on your little side project?" he asked, one night leaning against my kitchen counter while I showed him a flow diagram. "It's not little," I said, not looking up. "It just doesn't need to be loud." He laughed, not in a cruel way, just dismissive. "I'm just saying you should think bigger. Pitch it. Monetize it." "I will," I said, "when it's ready." He nodded like he agreed. Then he started asking questions. At first they were surface level. What's the main value here? Who's the customer? How does it scale? But over time they got more specific. How does the system predict reorder timing? What data inputs are you prioritizing? Can it integrate with POS systems? I answered everything. Not all at once. Not like I handed him a blueprint, but piece by piece over weeks, maybe months. Conversations over coffee, quick explanations while I cooked. Screenshots I sent when he said he was just curious. I didn't think of it as giving anything away. He was my brother. And honestly, part of me liked that he seemed interested. Because in my family, interest usually came with a condition. Ethan got attention because he chased opportunity. I got silence because I worked quietly. At family dinners, it was always the same. "So Ethan's talking to investors now?" my mom would say, smiling like she was already proud of something that hadn't happened yet. "That's great," I'd say. And Callie's still designing things, my dad would add, not unkindly, but not really understanding either. "I'm building a system I corrected once, for what he asked." I opened my mouth, then closed it, because explaining it never seemed to land. Ethan would jump in sometimes. It's like inventory optimization, but smarter. And suddenly they'd nod. "Oh, that sounds interesting," my mom would say to him. Not to me. It was subtle, but it was consistent, and I got used to it. Months passed. My prototype improved. I started testing it with a small boutique owner I knew just to see if it actually worked outside my screen. It did. Not perfectly, but enough to confirm I wasn't imagining the value. That's when I started thinking about next steps. Not pitching yet, just protecting it. I mentioned that to Ethan once. I might need to talk to a lawyer, I said casually. He didn't look up from his phone. About what? Just making sure no one else can take it. He smiled slightly. You're overthinking. Ideas are cheap. Execution is what matters. I nodded, but something about the way he said it stayed with me. A few weeks later, I went over to his place. He had a whiteboard set up in his living room covered in diagrams. At first glance, it looked like typical startup brainstorming. Then I stepped closer. My stomach dropped. The structure was familiar. Too familiar. The same modular flow I'd designed. The same logic branches for demand prediction. Even the same labeling system I used internally. I didn't say anything right away. Working on something new, I asked, keeping my voice even. Yeah, he said casually. Just exploring ideas. I studied the board again. There were differences. Slight ones. Enough to make it look original if you didn't know what you were looking at. But I did. Looks complex, I said. He shrugged. It's nothing yet. I nodded slowly. And for the first time, I didn't feel proud that he was interested. I felt watched. After that, I stopped sharing. No more screenshots, no more explanations. When he asked questions, I kept my answers vague. It's still evolving, I'd say. Hard to explain, I'd add. He didn't push back. Not directly. But something shifted. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through my calendar trying to schedule a meeting with a potential advisor Jasmine had recommended. That's when I saw it. A shared contact had updated their availability, and Ethan's name appeared in the notes. Pitch meeting, product optimization platform. My chest tightened. I clicked into the details. There wasn't much. Just a time, a location, and a short description. But it was enough, because the description matched exactly what I had been building. Not similar. Exact. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to find another explanation. Trying to convince myself I was connecting dots that weren't actually connected. Then I remembered the whiteboard. The questions. The way he'd said ideas are cheap. My phone felt heavier in my hand. I didn't call him. I didn't text. Instead, I took a screenshot. Then another. And then I opened my folder, the one where I kept every version of my work, and started looking at the timestamps again. Carefully. Slowly. Because for the first time, I wasn't just building something anymore. I was trying to understand when it stopped being mine. And right as that thought settled in, my phone buzzed. A new email. From a name I didn't recognize. Subject line. Looking forward to Ethan Castro's pitch. I didn't reply to the email. I read it 3 times. Then a fourth, like something might change if I stared long enough. Looking forward to Ethan Castro's pitch. The concept sounds promising, especially the adaptive inventory logic you mentioned. Adaptive inventory logic. That was my phrase. Not a general term. Not something you'd casually come up with if you were just exploring ideas. It was something I'd written in my earliest notes, then carried through every version because it described exactly what made the system different. I closed my laptop, then opened it again. Not to respond, but to start pulling everything together. Up until that moment, I'd been reacting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, telling myself I needed more clarity before doing anything. But clarity wasn't coming, so I stopped waiting for it. I opened my main project folder, the one I'd been maintaining since the first week, and started going through it like someone else would. Not as the creator, as someone trying to prove ownership. Every file had a date. Every iteration had a version number. I had notes attached to most of them, why I made a change, what problem I was solving, what I still didn't understand yet. At the time, it had just been how I worked. Now it looked like evidence. I copied everything into a new folder, labeled it cleanly, backed it up twice, once to an external drive, once to a cloud account I'd never used for anything else. Then I started organizing, chronologically first. Then by feature. I isolated the core components demand prediction reorder, timing integration logic. For each one, I pulled the earliest version I could find and the most recent one. Side by side, they told a story. Not a perfect one, but a clear one. I paused at one file in particular. Adaptive inventory model, V2, date modified 11 months earlier. I opened it. There in the comments section was a note I barely remembered writing. Need to refine seasonal weighting current model overreacts to short-term spikes. I scrolled further. There were timestamps embedded in the testing logs. Small details I'd never thought anyone else would look at. I exported everything into PDFs. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted it to be readable to someone who didn't know me. Someone like a lawyer. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. From Ethan. Hey, quick thing. Don't mention your project to anyone this week. Timing's weird. I'll explain later. I stared at it. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Or maybe a boundary he was trying to set. For me, I didn't respond. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it with the rest. Then I picked up my keys and left the apartment. Jasmine worked out of a co-working space downtown. It was where we'd met a year earlier. She was a data analyst, sharp, in a way that made everything feel more grounded. When I walked in, she looked up immediately. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't," I replied, sitting across from her. "I need you to look at something." I opened my laptop and turned it toward her. I didn't explain everything at once. I let her read. The email, the calendar entry, the message from Ethan. Then I showed her the files, the timestamps, the progression. She didn't interrupt, didn't jump to conclusions. She just kept scrolling. After a few minutes, she leaned back slightly. "How much of this did you share with him?" she asked. "Not files directly," I said, "but explanations, screenshots, conversations." She nodded slowly. "And he's pitching it now." "Yes, as his own." I hesitated. I haven't heard him say it directly, I admitted, but everything points to that. She looked at me for a long second. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "You're not dealing with a misunderstanding." I felt my chest tighten. "I know," I said quietly. "No." She continued more firmly. "What I mean is you're not in a situation where talking it out fixes this. If he's already pitching, if investors are involved, this is moving fast. I don't want to escalate it," I said. "He's my brother, and he's acting like your competitor," she replied. The words landed heavier than I expected. I looked down at my hands. I need to be sure," I said, "before I do anything." Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "Then get sure in a way that matters," she said. "Not emotionally, legally." I let that sit. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. She tapped the folder on my screen. "You already did," she said. "You documented everything. Now you protect it." I exhaled slowly. "And if I'm wrong," I asked. She held my gaze. "Then you've protected something you built," she said. "That's not a mistake." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she added more gently, "Callie, if he's willing to do this, he's already decided what matters more." I nodded. Not because I agreed completely, but because I didn't have a better explanation. That afternoon, I went back home and started looking into intellectual property law. Not in depth, just enough to understand the basics. One thing became clear quickly. Timing mattered. Not just who created something, but when it was documented, when it was filed, when it could be proven. And more importantly, who acted first. I closed the last tab and sat there for a while. Then I opened a new one. Intellectual Property Attorney San Diego. Several names came up. Reviews, websites, specialties. I clicked through a few, scanning for anything that felt grounded, not flashy, not overly polished. One name kept appearing in multiple recommendations. Daniel Reeves. I opened his website, read through his background. Years of experience in patent filings, startup disputes, ownership conflicts. The kind of work that didn't happen unless something had already gone wrong. I hesitated before filling out the contact form, not because I didn't think I needed it, but because sending that message would make something real that I wasn't ready to fully name yet. Still, I typed. Kept it simple. "Hi, my name is Callie Castro. I've developed a product concept, and I believe it may be at risk of being used without my permission. I have documentation and would like to understand my options." I read it once, then hit send. The confirmation message popped up immediately. "Thank you. We'll be in touch within 24 hours. I closed my laptop. For the first time that day, I felt something shift. Not relief. Not yet. But direction. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was moving. And just as I stood up to get a glass of water, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. Short. Casual. I set up a company. We should talk. I looked at the screen for a long second. Then I noticed the name attached to the message signature. Not just his. Castro Dynamics LLC. I hadn't heard that name before, but I already knew exactly what it was. Daniel Reeves didn't try to impress me. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into his office. No dramatic language, no promises about winning. Just a clean desk, a legal pad, and a man who listened more than he spoke. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. Not every detail. Just the ones that mattered. The idea, the timeline, Ethan's involvement, the email, the pitch meeting, the company he had just formed. When I finished, Daniel didn't react immediately. He flipped through the documents I'd brought printed, labeled, organized, in a way that suddenly felt less obsessive and more necessary. How long have you been documenting your work like this? He asked. Since the beginning, I said. It's just how I work. He nodded once. That helps you, he said simply. He pulled one document closer, the early version of my system architecture. Did you ever formally assign this to anyone else? He asked. No. Sign any agreements? Partnership, joint development, anything like that? No. Did he ever contribute directly to the code, the design, or the underlying model? I paused. He asked questions, I said. A lot of them. But no, he didn't build it. Daniel leaned back slightly. Okay, he said. Then we're not dealing with shared ownership. We're dealing with potential misappropriation. The word landed differently than everything I'd been thinking. More precise, less emotional. Is that enough? I asked. Not on its own, he said. But combined with documentation, it becomes something we can work with. He tapped the stack of papers lightly. This timeline matters, he continued. Creation dates, iterations, independent development. If what you're saying holds up and based on this, does you have a strong position? I exhaled slowly, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. But he added, and I felt my chest tighten again, there's another layer here. He turned his screen toward me. Have you filed anything yet? I hesitated. Not yet, I admitted. I was thinking about it. He nodded. That's the piece that turns this from a dispute into leverage, he said. In the US, we operate under a first-to-file system for patents. That means the person who files first, not necessarily the one who thought of it first, has a legal advantage. I felt that sink in. So if he files before I do, I started. You're in a much harder position, Daniel finished. Silence stretched between us for a moment. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I hadn't mentioned yet. I actually started something, I said, placing it on the desk. I just didn't know if it was enough. He opened it carefully. Inside was the draft of my provisional patent application. Not perfect, not finalized, but structured, detailed, and dated. Daniel scanned the first few pages, then looked up at me. When did you prepare this? He asked. About 3 weeks ago. And you haven't filed it yet? No. He closed the folder gently. Then we don't wait, he said. The clarity in his voice was different from anything else he'd said so far. This gets filed immediately, he continued. Provisional patent application. That gives you a priority date. It doesn't grant full protection yet, but it establishes your claim. I nodded slowly. And once that's in place, I asked. Then we watch, he said. If your brother proceeds, if he pitches, raises money, builds on this, we have a documented timeline that predates his activity. That's where your leverage comes from. Leverage. The word felt cold, but also necessary. What about confronting him? I asked. Daniel shook his head slightly. Not yet, he said. Right now, your strength is that he doesn't know what you've done. The moment you confront him, he adjusts. He prepares. He may even try to file something himself. I thought about Ethan's message. Don't mention your project this week. Timing's weird. I think he's already moving, I said quietly. Then we move faster, Daniel replied. He stood signaling the meeting was shifting from discussion to action. I'll have my team review your draft, he said. We'll clean up the language, make sure the claims are properly framed, and file it electronically. You'll receive a confirmation with a filing date. I stood as well, my mind already racing ahead. How long does that take? I asked. If we prioritize it, he said. A couple of days. A couple of days. It sounded short. It felt like everything. Before I left, Daniel handed me a short checklist. From this point on, he said, you document everything. No more informal conversations. If he contacts you, you keep records. If you access any shared systems, you log what you see. I nodded. And Callie? He added, his tone shifting slightly. This may become uncomfortable. Not just legally, but personally. I knew what he meant. He's my brother, I said. Daniel held my gaze. And right now, he's acting like someone who believes he can take something from you without consequence. I didn't respond, because I didn't trust myself to say anything without softening it. Instead, I thanked him and walked out. The sunlight outside felt too bright after the controlled quiet of his office. I got into my car and sat there for a minute, hands resting on the steering wheel. Then I took out my phone. There were 3 missed messages from Ethan, all within the last hour. Hey, we need to talk. It's about the company. Call me when you can. I stared at them. Then I opened my notes app and wrote down the time, just like Daniel had said. Document everything. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, I drove home and opened my laptop. There was already an email waiting for me from Daniel's office. Subject line, draft review, urgent filing. Attached was a revised version of my application cleaner, tighter, more precise than anything I could have written on my own. I read through it slowly, line by line. It wasn't just my idea anymore. It was structured into something that could be defended, something that could hold. At the bottom of the email was one sentence. Please confirm so we can file immediately. I hovered over the reply button, then clicked. Yes, please proceed. I hit send. And just like that, something shifted. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone else could see, but internally everything felt anchored. For the first time since I'd seen that whiteboard, I wasn't just trying to keep up. I was ahead. 2 days later, the confirmation arrived. Official. Time-stamped, filed. Priority date established. I printed it, held it in my hands for a second longer than necessary, then placed it in a folder. The same kind I'd been using from the beginning. Only this time, it wasn't just documentation. It was protection. That night, Ethan called again. I let it ring, then go to voicemail. A minute later, a message came through. His voice was casual, controlled. Hey, so things are moving fast. I've got a pitch this week. Big one. I'd rather we be on the same page before that. Same page. I sat there listening to the message again. Then I looked at the confirmation letter on my desk. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond immediately. Because now timing wasn't something happening to me. It was something I controlled. Ethan chose Sunday dinner. He didn't say it directly, but I could tell from the way my mom texted me that morning. Dinner at 6? Your brother has something exciting to share. Exciting. I stared at the message for a second before typing back, I'll be there. I knew exactly what this was, and for the first time, I didn't feel unprepared. I arrived a few minutes early like I always did. The house looked the same, warm lighting, the smell of something roasting in the oven. My dad's low voice coming from the living room. Familiar, predictable. I stepped inside and my mom smiled the way she always did when everything felt normal. Callie, perfect timing, she said. Ethan's already here. Of course he was. I walked into the dining area, and there he was, leaning back in his chair, relaxed, confident like nothing had shifted in the last few months. Hey, he said, standing up like we were just catching up after a regular week. Hey, I replied, matching his tone. We sat down. Plates were passed around. Small talk filled the first few minutes, work traffic things that didn't matter. Then my mom set her fork down. So she said, smiling at Ethan, tell us. He didn't hesitate. I started a company, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My dad leaned forward slightly. Yeah, What kind? Ethan glanced at me for half a second, just enough for me to notice. Tech, he said. Product optimization for small businesses. Inventory systems. Predictive modeling. The words landed exactly where he wanted them to. My mom's eyes lit up. That sounds amazing. It is, he said. We've already had interest from investors. I've got a pitch this week. I didn't react. Not outwardly. But I felt every word like a confirmation. Not suspicion anymore. Not doubt. Just confirmation. That's a big step, my dad said. You've been working on this a while. Ethan nodded. Yeah. Been building it quietly. Quietly. I almost smiled. Instead, I reached for my glass of water and took a slow sip. Because this wasn't the moment. Not yet. How far along is it? My mom asked. Far enough, he said. We've got a working model. Strong projections. I asked, finally speaking. Ethan looked at me just briefly. My team, he said. I nodded. Right. There was a pause, small but noticeable. Then he leaned back slightly, shifting the tone. Actually, he said that's something I wanted to talk to you about. I didn't move. I think there's a place for you in this, he continued. You've been working on similar things. Design user flow. It could be a good fit. There it was. Framed like an opportunity, packaged like inclusion, but positioned exactly where he wanted it. Below him. What kind of role, I asked. Product support, he said easily. Help refine the interface, maybe assist with feature development. Assist. I let the word sit for a second. And the core system, I asked. He shrugged slightly. That's already handled. Of course it was. My mom jumped in before I could respond. Callie, this is great, she said. You two working together, it makes so much sense. I looked at her, then at my dad. Both of them waiting for me to agree, to fall into place. Like I always had. I'm not interested, I said. The room went quiet. Not loud, not dramatic. Just still. Ethan blinked once like he hadn't expected that. Why not? He asked. Because it's not my project, I said calmly. That doesn't mean you can't be part of it, he replied, his tone still controlled. It does to me, I said. Another pause. My dad cleared his throat slightly. Callie, he said sometimes you have to be flexible. This could be a good opportunity. For who, I asked. He frowned. For you? I held his gaze for a second. Then looked back at Ethan. Where did the idea come from, I asked. It wasn't an accusation. Not yet. Just a question. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He smiled instead. It evolved, he said. You know how these things work. I nodded slowly. I do, I said. And I did. That's why I could see exactly what he was doing. Deflecting without denying. Keeping it vague enough to avoid being pinned down. My mom shifted in her seat. Callie, don't make this complicated, she said. Your brother is offering you something here. I looked at her again, then back at my plate, because if I kept looking at them, I might say something too soon. And timing mattered now, more than anything. I'm not making it complicated, I said quietly. I'm just being clear. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his tone changing just a fraction. Look, he said, I know you've been working on your own version of something like this. That's great. But this is already moving. Investors' timelines, it's not something you can just step into at the same level. There it was. Not aggressive, but firm. A line drawn. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not even hurt. Just clarity. You're right, I said. He seemed relieved for a second. Then I added, it's not something I can step into. The relief disappeared. Because he heard what I didn't say. I'm building something else, I continued. Separately, he studied me for a moment, trying to read how much I knew, how much I was holding back. That's fine, he said finally. Just don't get in your own way. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded once. I won't. Dinner moved on after that. Conversation shifted. My mom tried to lighten the mood. My dad asked about the pitch again. Ethan answered confidently like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just stepped out of the role he'd already assigned me. When it was over, I stood up to leave. Ethan followed me out to the driveway. Hey, he said, lowering his voice. You're taking this too personally. I turned to look at him. Am I asked. Yeah, he said. This isn't about you. It's about execution, timing, opportunity. I held his gaze. Then I said something I hadn't planned. Timing does matter, I said. He nodded like he agreed. Exactly. I almost told him then. About the filing, about the date, about the fact that the timeline he was so confident in wasn't what he thought it was. But I didn't, because Daniel was right. The moment I said it, everything would change. And I wasn't ready for that shift yet. Good luck with your pitch, I said instead. He smiled slightly. Thanks. I got into my car and closed the door. For a second, I just sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing steady. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, opened my notes, and wrote down everything that had just happened. The exact words, the tone, the timing, because now, even conversations like this weren't just moments. They were part of the record, part of something bigger. And as I finished typing, my phone buzzed again. A new email, from a name I recognized this time. Daniel Reeves. Subject line, competitor activity. You should see this. I opened it, and as I started reading, I realized something I hadn't expected. Ethan wasn't just pitching my idea. He had already submitted something. I read Daniel's email twice before I clicked the attachment. Then I read it again. Attached is a publicly available filing submitted under Castro Dynamics LLC. It appears to be a provisional application related to your described system. My stomach tightened. So he had filed. Not just talked about it. Not just pitched. Filed. I opened the document. At first glance, it looked legitimate. Structured. Technical. Enough detail to pass as something real. But the more I read, the more familiar it felt. Not in the way a general concept overlaps. In the way specific phrasing repeats. Variable names. System logic descriptions. Even the order of certain modules. It wasn't identical, but it was close enough that I could map my own work onto it almost line by line. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. For a moment, everything blurred into one thought. I was too late. I picked up my phone and called Daniel before I could think too far ahead. He answered on the second ring. Callie, I saw the filing, I said. He already submitted something. I know, he replied calmly. That's why I sent it. He filed before me. There was a brief pause. No, Daniel said. He filed after you. I blinked. What? You filed 2 days before his submission, he continued. Your priority date is earlier. I felt something release in my chest, slow, controlled, but real. Are you sure, I asked? Yes, he said. I confirmed the timestamps. His application references a development timeline that overlaps with yours, but legally your filing establishes precedence. I closed my eyes for a second. Not relief, not completely, but something steadier than panic. So what does that mean, I asked. It means he can't claim originality over something you've already established, Daniel said. At least not without explaining the overlap. I looked back at the screen, at the document Ethan had submitted. He's going to try anyway, I said. Probably, Daniel agreed. And that's where your documentation becomes critical. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. What do we do now? We don't rush, he said. We let him proceed. If he continues to pitch, raise money, or build under the assumption that he owns this, we have leverage. Leverage again. I was starting to understand what that actually meant. It's not just about proving you created it, Daniel continued. It's about showing that he knew or should have known that he didn't have the right to use it. I thought about the messages, the conversations, the way he'd told me not to mention my project. I have records, I said, texts, emails. Good, Daniel replied. Keep everything. And don't engage directly on this topic yet. I hesitated. He's pitching this week, I said. Big investors. Then that's where this becomes visible, Daniel said. If his claims conflict with your documented timeline, it creates risk for him and for anyone backing him. I let that sink in, so we just wait. We prepare, he corrected, and we observe. After the call ended, I sat there for a while, the document still open in front of me. I scrolled through it again, slower this time, not as the person who created the original, but as someone analyzing a copy, There were differences, subtle ones. Some sections were reworded, others simplified. But in trying to make it his own, Ethan had made mistakes. Technical inconsistencies, gaps in logic where he didn't fully understand why something worked only that it did. I opened one of my own files side by side, compared the sections, and there it was. A key function one I'd spent weeks refining was described in his filing incorrectly. Not completely wrong, but enough that it would fail under certain conditions. He didn't know that, because he hadn't built it. He had learned it. From me, I took a screenshot, then another, saved them into my folder, time-stamped, organized. By the time I finished, the initial shock had settled into something else. Focus! Later that afternoon, Jasmine came over. I didn't explain everything from scratch. I showed her Daniel's email, Ethan's filing, the comparison. She read quietly, just like before. Then she looked up. He copied you, she said. Yes. And he filed after you. Yes. She leaned back slightly. Then why does this feel like he's still ahead? She asked. Because it did. Even with the timeline in my favor, he was the one out there. Pitching, talking, building momentum. Because he's visible, I said. And I'm not. She nodded slowly. Visibility matters, she said, but so does risk. I looked at her. What do you mean? If investors realize there's a dispute, especially one where the original creator has documentation, it makes the whole thing unstable, she explained. They don't like uncertainty. I thought about that. About the pitch. About the room he'd be standing in. Confident. Certain. Unchallenged. You're saying I don't need to stop him, I said. Just let the situation catch up to him. I'm saying you don't need to chase him, she replied. You just need to be ready when it matters. I nodded, because that felt right. Not passive, just controlled. That night, I went back through everything again. The files, the messages, the filing confirmations. I organized them into a single timeline. Not for me, for anyone who might need to understand it quickly. Clear, linear, undeniable. At the very top, I placed 2 documents side by side. My filing confirmation, his filing record, 2 dates, 48 hours apart. That was it. That was the difference between speculation and proof. Between he said, she said, and something concrete. I saved the document, then closed my laptop. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to step away. Not because things were resolved, but because they were positioned. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even got out of bed. A text from Ethan. Big pitch today. Wish me luck. I stared at it. At the casual tone. At the assumption that everything was still normal. That I was still on the outside. Watching. I didn't reply. Instead, I got up, made coffee, and sat down at my desk. I opened my email. There was a new message waiting. From Rachel Bennett, the CEO who had been copied on Ethan's pitch materials. Subject line, quick question about your work. My pulse slowed not faster, because I already knew what this was. Not confirmation, not yet. But the beginning of something shifting. I clicked open, and read the first line. Hi, Callie. Your name came up in connection with a system we're reviewing. I didn't answer Rachel Bennett right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood what this moment was. This wasn't confrontation. This was verification. I read her email again, slower this time. Hi, Callie. Your name came up in connection with a system we're reviewing. I'd appreciate a quick call to clarify your involvement. Clarify, not accuse, not confirm. Just clarify. That meant she wasn't certain yet, which meant Ethan hadn't fully secured the narrative. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened my laptop and pulled up the timeline I'd built the night before. Everything was there. Clean, sequential, supported. If I responded, it had to be controlled. No emotion, no assumptions, just facts. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Started again. Hi, Rachel. I'm available to speak. I've been independently developing a system that may overlap with what you're reviewing. I have documentation and filings that establish my work and timeline. Let me know a time that works for you. I read it twice. It didn't accuse Ethan. It didn't over-explain. It just opened the door. I hit send. The response came faster than I expected. Can you join a call in 30 minutes? I looked at the screen, then at the clock, then back at the screen. Yes, I typed. 30 minutes later, I was sitting at my desk with everything open in front of me. Timeline, filing confirmations, key documents. Not because I planned to overwhelm her, but because I didn't want to hesitate. The call connected. Rachel's face appeared first composed, professional, observant. Callie, thanks for joining on short notice, she said. Of course, I replied. She didn't waste time. I'm going to be direct, she said. We've been reviewing a product presented by Callie Castro. During our diligence process, your name surfaced more than once in connection with early development. I want to understand your role. I nodded. That makes sense, I said. I didn't rush into explanation. I let a second pass just enough to stay measured. I developed the core system independently, I said. Over the past 2 years, I have full documentation of that process, including dated iterations, design notes, and a provisional patent filing. Rachel's expression didn't change, but her attention sharpened. You filed, she asked. Yes, I said. My application was submitted before any related filings from Castro Dynamics. I could see the shift. Subtle, but real. Do you have confirmation of that? She asked. Yes. I shared my screen. Not everything, just the key document. The filing confirmation. The date. Clear. Unambiguous. Rachel leaned slightly forward. And you're saying this work was not developed jointly? She asked. That's correct, I said. Ethan was aware of the project. I shared high-level information early on, but he did not contribute to the design or development. Another pause. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Why didn't this come up earlier? I considered that for a second. Because I wasn't aware he was presenting it as his own, I said. Not until recently. That wasn't entirely true, but it was accurate enough. And more importantly, it was defensible. Rachel nodded slowly. Understood, she said. She glanced off-screen briefly, probably at notes or someone else in the room. Then she looked back at me. This creates a complication, she said. I didn't respond. I let her define it. We're in the middle of evaluating whether to move forward with funding, she continued. Any uncertainty around ownership, especially at the foundational level, is a significant risk. I nodded once. I understand, I said. And just to be clear, she added, this isn't about choosing sides. It's about protecting the integrity of the investment. I get that, I said. There was a pause. Then she asked something I hadn't expected. What do you want to happen here? The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I hadn't thought about it in those terms. Not yet. I could say I wanted the pitch stopped. The company shut down. Ethan exposed. But none of that felt precise. I want clarity around ownership, I said finally, and for the work to be attributed correctly. Rachel studied me for a moment. You're not asking us to walk away from him, she said. I'm asking you to understand what you're evaluating, I replied. That seemed to land. She nodded once. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pause any decisions until we complete a full review. That includes both your documentation and his. I felt something settle, not relief, but alignment. Okay, I said. I may need additional materials from you, she added. I have everything organized, I said. I can send it over. Please do, she said. Then after a brief pause, she added, and Callie, I appreciate how you handled this. I didn't respond to that, because I wasn't sure how to. The call ended a minute later. I sat there for a second staring at the blank screen. Then I closed my laptop. Not slowly, not dramatically, just closed it. Across the city, Ethan was probably finishing his pitch. Confident, certain, unaware, but something had changed. Not publicly, not yet, but inside the process that actually mattered. The part he couldn't control. My phone buzzed. A message from Jasmine. How did it go? I typed back. They're pausing. A few seconds later, she replied. That's everything. I stared at the screen because she was right. It wasn't a win. Not yet. But it was the first time Ethan's version of the story had been interrupted. The first time someone with power had stopped and asked, Is this actually his? Later that afternoon, I received a follow-up email from Rachel. Short, direct. We've informed Ethan that we need to revisit certain aspects of the product's origin before proceeding. I read that line twice. Then once more, not for the words, but for what they meant. He had been questioned, not by me, but by the people he needed. And for the first time since this started, I allowed myself to feel something close to balance. Not because I had exposed him, but because the truth had entered the room, and it wasn't leaving. Ethan called me that evening. Not a text, not a casual check-in. A call. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, I said, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause on the other end, short, controlled. You talked to Rachel, he said. Not a question. I leaned back in my chair. She reached out, I replied. Another pause, then a small exhale. You could have told me, he said. I almost smiled. Told you what I asked. That you were involved, he said. That you had concerns. Concerns. That was the word he chose. Not ownership, not authorship, just concerns. I didn't think it was something you wanted to discuss, I said. That's not fair, he replied quickly. You went around me. I let that sit for a second. Then I said I responded to a direct question. Silence again. This time longer. When he spoke, his tone had shifted, less polished, more careful. They're pausing the deal, he said. I know, I replied. They think there's a conflict, he added. There is, I said. His voice tightened slightly. Callie, this doesn't have to turn into something bigger than it is. I didn't interrupt. I mean that he continued. We can sort this out. Internally. As a family. There it was. The first move. Reframing the situation. Pulling it back into a space where control was easier. I looked down at the notes I'd taken earlier. Then back out the window. I don't think this is a family conversation anymore, I said. He didn't respond immediately. You're making it one, he said finally. No, I replied. I'm acknowledging what it already is. Another pause. Then he tried a different angle. Look, he said softer now, I didn't take anything from you. We talked about ideas. We both developed things. This isn't as clear-cut as you're making it. I let him finish. Then I asked, did you tell them that? He hesitated. That it was shared, I pressed. Yes, he said. Because it was. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I said. Just that. No argument. No pushback. And somehow that seemed to unsettle him more. What does that mean, he asked. It means we're going to let the documentation speak, I said. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Documentation, he repeated. Yes. Another silence. This one heavier, because now he understood. Not everything, but enough. You filed something, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer right away. Then I said I protected my work. His tone changed instantly. You went behind my back, he said. Sharper now. I almost laughed, but didn't. I did it before I knew what you were doing, I replied. Which matters. That's not how this works, he snapped. You don't just. That's exactly how it works, I said calmly. He stopped. Not because he agreed, but because he realized something. The ground had shifted, and he wasn't standing where he thought he was anymore. This is going to hurt both of us, he said after a moment. I considered that. Maybe I said, but not in the same way. Another pause. Then he tried one last time. We can fix this, he said. We can restructure things, bring you in properly, give you equity. Equity, offered like a solution, like a compromise, like I should be grateful. I'm not looking for a position in your company, I said. Then what do you want? He asked, frustration creeping in. I didn't answer immediately, because now I knew. Not in theory, not emotionally, but clearly. I want what's mine, I said. The line went quiet, not disconnected, just still. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. You're going to burn this down, he said. I thought about that. About everything that had led here. The months of work, the conversations, the silence, the choices. No, I said. I'm not. He didn't respond. So I added, I'm just not going to let you build it on top of me. That was it. That was the line. He exhaled slowly. Then we're done here, he said. Okay, I replied. The call ended. I set my phone down and sat there for a moment, not shaking, not overwhelmed, just still, because for the first time there was nothing left unsaid. Later that week, Daniel arranged a formal meeting. Not a family dinner, not a casual call. A legal setting, neutral ground. Ethan arrived with his own attorney. I noticed the difference immediately. Less relaxed, more contained. We sat across from each other at a long table. Documents in front of us. No small talk, no pretending. Daniel started. We're here to clarify ownership and potential overlap between two filings, he said. Callie's and Castro dynamics. Ethan's attorney nodded. Understood, he said. Then it began. Not dramatic, not loud, just precise. Daniel walked through my timeline, file by file, date by date, showing how the system evolved, when each component was introduced, how it connected. Then he placed Ethan's filing next to it, lined up the sections, highlighted similarities, not general ones, specific ones, language, structure, logic. Ethan's attorney listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, taking notes. Ethan didn't say much, at first. Then Daniel pulled up something I hadn't seen him use yet. An email from Ethan. Months earlier. Subject line, your system logic. I felt my chest tighten slightly. I hadn't included that in what I sent him. Could you walk me through how you designed the adaptive layer Ethan had written? I want to understand your approach better. Your system. Not ours. Not shared. Yours. The room went quiet for a second. Then Daniel looked up. This is part of the record, he said. Ethan's attorney leaned forward. Do you have a response to that? He asked Ethan. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. It was early, he said. We were discussing ideas. Daniel nodded. And later he asked. He brought up another document. This time, a side-by-side comparison of the core function. My version, Ethan's version. Same structure, same sequence, but with a critical flaw in his. A missing condition that would break the system under specific inputs. Daniel didn't explain it right away. He let the silence build. Then he said, Callie, would you walk us through this section? I nodded. And for the first time in that room, I spoke not as someone defending herself, but as the person who built it. I explained the logic, the decision points, the reason for that missing condition. What would happen without it? It wasn't emotional. It wasn't accusatory. It was clear. By the time I finished, no one interrupted, because there wasn't anything to interrupt. The difference wasn't just in the files. It was in the understanding. Ethan's attorney sat back slightly, then looked at him, and in that moment I saw it. Not defeat, not yet, but recognition that this wasn't something that could be argued away. Daniel closed the folder. We're open to resolution, he said. Not aggressive, not passive, just firm. Ethan didn't look at me. He looked at the table, at the documents, at the space between what he had claimed and what was actually there. And for the first time since this started, he didn't try to explain it. He didn't try to reframe it. He just sat there, because the story he had built no longer held, and everyone in the room could see it. No one spoke for a few seconds after Daniel closed the folder. It wasn't dramatic silence. It was the kind that comes when everything necessary has already been said and repeating it would only make it weaker. Ethan's attorney was the first to move. He adjusted his notes, then looked at Daniel. Let's talk about resolution, he said. Not denial, not defense. Resolution. That alone told me more than anything else in the room. Daniel nodded once. Callie's position is straightforward, he said. She is the original creator of the system with documented development and an earlier filing date. Any continued use of that system without her authorization exposes your client and any associated parties to legal risk. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, still not looking at me. His attorney continued measured. We're not disputing that there's overlap, he said. But we need to define what that means in practical terms. Daniel didn't rush to answer. He glanced at me briefly. A subtle check-in. I gave a small nod. He turned back. It means your client cannot represent this system as independently developed, Daniel said. and he cannot proceed with funding or deployment without addressing ownership. Ethan finally looked up. For the record, he said, his voice controlled again. I didn't set out to take anything from Callie. No one responded immediately, because intention wasn't the point anymore. His attorney leaned in slightly. What are you asking for? He asked. The question hung in the air. This was the moment everything narrowed down to a decision. Not emotion, not history, just outcome. I had thought about it already, not in vague terms, in specifics. I want full ownership of the system, I said. My voice was steady. Clear, no shared control, no partial rights. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. His attorney nodded slowly, processing. And Castro Dynamics, he asked. They stopped using it, I said. Immediately. That landed, not explosively, but definitively. Ethan finally turned toward me. That's everything he said. It wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Everything you built from it, I replied. He shook his head slightly. You're asking me to walk away from a company, he said. I'm asking you not to build one on something that isn't yours, I said. The room went quiet again. His attorney spoke next. If we agree to cease use, he said, what happens to the existing work? The pitch materials, the investor conversations. Daniel answered this one. They're withdrawn, he said. Any representation of ownership is corrected. If necessary, disclosures are made to relevant parties. Ethan let out a short breath. This is going to destroy the deal, he said. Daniel didn't respond. Because that wasn't his concern. Ethan looked at me again. Longer this time. You could take a percentage, he said. We restructure. You lead product. You get recognition. I held his gaze. This isn't about recognition, I said. Then what is it about? He asked, frustration breaking through. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I just said it. It's about not letting you decide that my work is negotiable after the fact. That was it. No explanation needed. His attorney exhaled quietly, then turned to him. We need to consider the exposure here, he said. If we contest this and lose, the consequences are significantly worse. Ethan didn't respond. He looked down again. At the documents. At the timeline. At the gap between what he had assumed and what was now undeniable. Minutes passed. Not wasted. Just necessary. Then his attorney spoke again. We're willing to discuss a transfer, he said. Full assignment of any overlapping IP to Callie in exchange for a clean separation. Daniel nodded. That's consistent with our position, he said. There were still details. There always are. Language. Scope. Deadlines. But the direction had been set. Ethan signed first. Not immediately. Not easily. But without argument. I watched him for a second. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger. Just awareness. This was the moment everything shifted. Not when I found out. Not when I filed. Not even when Rachel paused the deal. This. When the structure he built stopped holding. When he had to choose between fighting something he couldn't prove or stepping back from something he couldn't claim. I signed after him. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood what it meant. Not just legally, personally. When it was done, the room didn't change. No one stood up dramatically. No one said anything unnecessary. Daniel gathered the documents. Ethan's attorney closed his folder. And Ethan just sat there for a second longer. Then he stood, without looking at me. I didn't think you'd go this far, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was something else. Maybe surprise. Maybe something closer to realization. I considered responding, then decided against it, because there wasn't anything left to explain. He left the room without another word. I stayed seated for a moment, hands resting lightly on the table, breathing steady. Daniel looked at me. It's done, he said. I nodded. Yes, I said. But it didn't feel like an ending. Not exactly. It felt like something had been returned. Something that had been taken quietly and restored the same way, without noise, without spectacle, just correctly. Outside, the afternoon light hadn't changed. The world hadn't shifted. People were still walking past the building, talking, living, unaware of what had just happened inside. And that felt right, because this was never about making a scene. It was about making something clear. And for the first time since this started, it was. The first morning in my new office didn't feel dramatic. No grand opening, no announcement. Just a quiet space, a clean desk, and a system that was finally legally completely mine. Jasmine sat across from me, scrolling through the latest build. "You fixed the edge case issue," she said, glancing up. I had time, I replied. That was the difference now. Time didn't feel like something I was racing against. It felt available. We had rebuilt the core structure under a new name. Not because I had to, but because I wanted a clean separation. Something that didn't carry the weight of what had happened. The functionality was the same. The logic was stronger. And every line of it felt intentional again. "What about investors?" Jasmine asked. "I've had a few calls," I said. "Different people." Through Rachel, I nodded. She introduced me to a couple of groups after everything settled. Not as a favor, just context. Jasmine smiled slightly. That matters more. It did. Not because it opened doors, but because it clarified what those doors were built on. Not hype, not positioning, just trust. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Rachel. Short, direct like always. "Glad to see things moving forward. Let me know if you'd like to reconnect with the team when you're ready. No pressure, no expectation, just acknowledgement." I replied with a simple thank you, nothing more, because I wasn't trying to rebuild anything from before. I was building something new. A few weeks passed before I saw Ethan again. Not at a meeting, not through a call, at my parents' house, Sunday dinner, the same setting as before. But nothing about it felt the same. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the table quieter than I remembered, less certain. My mom greeted me like she always did, but there was a hesitation underneath it now. Something unspoken. My dad nodded when I walked in. "Callie." "Hi." No one mentioned the company, or the meeting, or the agreement. But it was there. In the way conversations paused. In the way people chose their words more carefully. We sat down to eat. For a while, it was just normal conversation. Safe topics. Neutral ground. Then my mom said it. "I heard things are going well for you," she said, looking at me. I met her gaze. "They are," I said. She nodded. "That's good." A simple sentence. But it carried something different this time. Not assumption, not comparison, just recognition. Ethan didn't speak until later, when most of the dishes had been cleared and the room had quieted down again. "I saw your latest demo," he said. I looked at him. "Yeah?" He nodded. "It's solid. That was it. No qualifiers, no reframing, just accurate." "Thank you," I said. There was a pause. Then he added, quieter this time. "You always had the deeper understanding of it." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't feel the need to fill the space. "I didn't handle it well," he continued. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't wrapped in apology language. But they were direct. I nodded once. "I know I said." Another pause. Then he asked, "Are we okay?" That question felt heavier than everything else he'd said. Not because of the past, but because of what it implied about the future. I thought about it for a moment. About everything that had happened. The choices, the silence, the shift. "We're different," I said. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's not a bad thing," I added. It wasn't. It just wasn't the same, and it didn't need to be. We finished dinner without pushing it further. No forced resolution, no attempt to rewind, just a new version of something that used to be familiar. On the drive home, I didn't feel the need to analyze it, or revisit every moment, or question whether I had done the right thing, because I already knew, not from the outcome, but from the process. I hadn't reacted. I hadn't rushed. I hadn't tried to win. I had just held on to what was mine and let everything else align around that. Back at my apartment, I set my keys down and walked over to my desk. The original folder, the one I'd been building since the beginning, was still there. Same structure, same files, same notes. Only now it wasn't something I was protecting. It was something I had already secured. I opened it, scrolled through a few of the early entries, read a line I had written months ago almost without thinking. Need to refine seasonal weighting current model overreacts to short-term spikes. I smiled slightly, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, and it was mine. I closed the folder, turned off the light, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying anything unfinished, just moving forward. The hardest part of being underestimated isn't the moment it happens. It's the quiet way it teaches you to doubt your own voice, to second-guess your instincts, to explain yourself less because it never seems to land the way it should. But there's a difference between being overlooked and being erased. And once you recognize that difference, everything changes. This wasn't a story about revenge. I didn't set out to expose my brother. I didn't try to tear anything down. I just paid attention. I documented what mattered. And when the time came, I chose not to negotiate my own work, just to keep things comfortable. If you've ever had something taken from you, your idea, your effort, your voice, you know how easy it is to let it go just to avoid conflict. But setting a boundary isn't the same as fighting, and protecting what you built doesn't make you difficult. It makes you clear. Forgiveness doesn't mean restoring access. It means deciding what no longer has permission to affect you the same way. If this story resonated with you, I'd really like to hear where you're watching from and what your experience has been. And if you want more stories like this, you can stay with the channel. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.